There are 4 editions of Windows Server 2019 that you can actually purchase. The lowest edition is Windows Server 2019 Essentials. This is intended for small businesses. So we'll say small biz. With this, you can only have 25 users and you can have up to 50 devices. That is it. So 25 users can connect to this, 50 devices can connect to this. Now, the big requirement or the thing to remember about this is this number, the 25 users, 50 devices, can never be increased. So it's not as if you could have a small company and you grow to have 40 users and say, well, I want all 40 users to be able to connect to this at the same time. Not possible. Microsoft actually recommends now that you do not use the Server 2019 Essentials. Instead, they recommend Microsoft 365, which is really like a cloud-based solution. Formerly, it's called Office 365. Just integrates with the Microsoft Azure cloud. So, unlikely you see the 2019 Essentials. About the only environments that would have this would have ran 2016 Essentials, and then they simply upgraded to the 2019. But that is the least common of the additions you would actually see. We also have Windows Server 2019 Standard Edition. This is largely intended for physical environments. Now, when I say physical environment, perhaps we should say physical servers. If you are running virtual machines, now if you're not familiar with the concept of virtual machines, that is something we get into a lot later in the course, but it simply means a virtual machine, you have one physical server. So we'll say this is your physical server. And on this server in Microsoft, you load something called Hyper-V, which is Microsoft's virtualization platform, and then you can run other operating systems on this physical server. For example, I could have a virtual machine that runs the Linux operating system. I could have another that runs Server 2019. I could have another that runs Server 2016. All these are completely separate operating systems, but they don't require separate physical servers. They just run directly on this physical server here. So that's how our virtual machines would actually exist. But again, that's something we configure in much more detail later on. Server 2019 Standard Edition is something you would run in an environment where you are primarily running physical servers and you're not going to use a lot of virtualization. Now, a fact about this, even though it's for environments that don't have a lot of virtualization, it does come with 2 virtual licenses. Now, there's one catch to this. Now, with this, it means I could install the Standard Edition on this server here. And I could run this virtual machine and this virtual machine, and I do not have to go back to Microsoft and buy another virtual license. If you want to run a third, you would have to go back to Microsoft and you'd have to buy that license. Now, there is one catch to this. And the catch is, if you use this physical server for anything other than hosting these virtual machines, it consumes one of those licenses. What I mean by that, let's say you create a bunch of folders on this server. So you have these shared folders. And you have users connect to these shared folders so they can access, Word documents and things like that inside of this folder. If you do that, this is acting really as a file server because users are connecting to it and accessing data. That consumes one of your licenses. So you would only be able to run one virtual machine without going back to Microsoft buying additional licenses. So to summarize that, really intended to run on physical servers, not in a highly virtualized environment, but does include 2 virtual licenses. If you are in a highly virtualized environment, you would run Data Center. With the Data Center, it comes with unlimited virtual licenses. Now, what that means, I just don't have to go back to Microsoft and buy a license to run a virtual machine. You purchase data center, install it on your physical server. Now you can create the virtual machines you want. No licensing specifically for virtualization would be required. It's all bundled in with that data center license. There are a few additional features that we get into later on that are unique to the data center. They will be storage spaces, storage replication, but standard and data center feature-wise, very few differences between the two. Just 4 things data center can do that standard cannot, and those we cover in more detail later on. But the big difference between these two, licensing. The last edition, the Hyper-V Server 2019, that is very different. If you want to run virtual machines, like I have in this graphic here, you could go to standard or data center and you could load this Hyper-V role and you could run these virtual machines. Well, what Microsoft has done, they have given us a dedicated Hyper-V server. Now, what's interesting about this, you have to download this from the Microsoft site. So it's not a disk or anything like that. So you download it from Microsoft. It is a completely free download. So we'll say it itself is free, but the catch comes with no virtual licenses. Microsoft will often tout this as being free, which I always find misleading, although it's not untrue. I prefer to say it's more pay me later instead of paying me now, because you go download it, you can install it, but before you host virtual machines, you have to go back to Microsoft and buy virtual licenses. So it's truly not as if you're getting free operating systems you can deploy in your environment or anything like that. You just go buy the licenses. Now, some interesting facts about this. It has no graphical user interface. I'm going to say GUI or GUI for graphical user interface. There is only a command prompt when you log into this. So it is a very bare bones operating system. You cannot make this a file server or do anything with it other than host virtual machines. So this is kind of the odd one out. The Hyper-V server, just different. And this concept has long existed. We could go back to server 2016, server 2012. Microsoft has long had these dedicated Hyper-V servers. If you wanted to download the Hyper-V server, because that one is a little different to acquire, you can go to microsoft.com/evalcenter. The link to this URL is actually a resource under this lesson. You can just click on the resource and you'll see a text file with this URL if you want to navigate this site yourself. What I'm going to do on the site is just click on products here, and you'll see they have Server 2019, 2019 Essentials, Hyper-V. Now I'm just going to click on Windows Server 2019. Even though we're here to look at the Hyper-V download. What's interesting here, notice it says Windows Server 2019 is only an evaluation edition. It's valid for 180 days. So you'd have to reinstall this after 180 days. If we keep going down, you'll see the Server 2019 Essentials, 180 days. But you'll see the Hyper-V Server 2019 is unlimited. That means if you truly wanted to deploy this, you download it from here, you own it forever. You would just have to go back to Microsoft and you'd have to buy your licenses. Pretty interesting concept.